Well, hello, friends. This is Paris. Glad to be back in the new year 2026 with some more awesome information for clients and friends of Next Level Financial. As you guys know, I'm Paris Williams. I'm the CEO of Next Level Financial. We provide CFO services for consulting and real estate firms that are making an impact. We are in the Atlanta, Georgia area, but we work with clients all over the place. And one thing that I always say about a fractional CFO is you get questions about anything related to business. Now, we might not have all the answers, but we do have a lot of friends and a lot of connections who we end up connecting our folks with, whether that's on the attorney side, sometimes on the accounting side, on audit, on tax, all of that. Part of our role is to bring people together. With that in mind, I am very happy to introduce Megan Gordon, who I was introduced to her through another amazing person in the impact community. And he said, I think you should get to know Megan because she is an expert in employee ownership. And that is super cool to us because we work with a lot of family businesses, some of which are first generation or second generation ownership. And there's always questions about what are we going to do when we don't necessarily want to run the business, or when private equity reaches out and they make an offer. We're usually at the table when those moments happen. So I invited Megan to share information to our people about employee ownership. So, Megan, tell us a little bit more.
Harris, first of all, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and it's been so lovely getting to know you. Really excited to be talking to your network here. Employee ownership is something I'm really passionate about. It's something we're really passionate about here at Project Equity. So who is Project Equity? Project Equity, we are a nationwide nonprofit. We are one of the leading providers of information and technical assistance for folks who are actually looking to become employee owned. We work with partners across the country. We are also a capital provider. So we, in some of the cases where we're financing these transitions, we actually are doing that financing ourselves in whole or in part. And we also work to convene thought leaders, economic development professionals, any sort of, even up to government level folks to kind of educate them around what employee ownership is. I'm a senior business engagement and partnerships manager, which means most of my day I'm talking to small business owners. So if you're a small business owner or if you're a small business advisor who has small business owners who are curious about this, I would love to have a conversation. And that's kind of what we do. So I think we all know that it's not easy to sell a small business. Currently, over half of the small business owners in the United States are 55 or over. We call this the silver tsunami. It's this crashing wave of retiring folks who are looking for what their best exit plan is. And what we've found from doing analysis of biz buy sell data is that only about 30% of small businesses are transitioning within families. So that means parent to child, grandparent to grandchild, aunt to niece, whatever. And only about 20% of small businesses that are put up onto the open market actually sell. So when you add that 20 and that 30 together, you're leaving 50% of small businesses on the table without potentially a succession plan. But those can still be really strong, viable businesses. And we want to make sure that they have an option to continue. So when you're looking at your succession options, there's a couple different ways you could go. You could sell to your family members. You could be acquired by an outside buyer. You could close down your operations, which obviously I think everyone agrees that's the worst case scenario. Or the secret fourth option, employee ownership. So across the top of this grid are when we talk to small business owners, these are the sort of main things that we see them talking about. They're worried about the legacy of their business. Is it going to survive after them? They worked really hard to build it. They don't want that just to go away. They're also concerned about their bottom line. They need to be able to get the market value of their business out of it. Maybe that's their retirement plan. Sometimes they're curious about tax benefits. Obviously, we'd love to do tax advantages if we can. And we find a lot of small business owners are deeply concerned about what will happen to their employees. Small businesses, I know it's a cliche. People say, "Oh, we're like a family," but there is a component where it feels like that. These are the people that helped build the business, help the business get to where it is, and a lot of small business owners are concerned with what's going to happen to those folks. So we kind of look what of these will be solved by which of these, and selling to your family members. Yeah, you're probably going to preserve your legacy. Market value, don't know. Tax benefits, who knows? And ideally, your family members are going to keep your employees on, but you don't know for sure. Again, acquisition, a lot of question marks about that across the board, and you're definitely knocking the tax benefits out of the equation there. And so we like to say employee ownership is the option that really allows you to check all the boxes. So you're going to preserve that legacy, you're going to get that market value. Potentially tax benefits, it varies a little bit based on the form, and we can get into nuance on that if anybody wants to, get on a call and talk about that. And then you're going to be able to retain your employees. So we see it as a win-win.
Yeah, and I know I said I wasn't going to interrupt, but
Mhm.
looking
Right.
at this, it's so incredibly sad how many people don't realize how much value they've built over time and they just close down their operations. Like that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really interesting to add this option in for people. I know a lot of folks in our circle are not thinking about it, but I mean, I think if you're comparing it to closing down, I mean, it's way better than closing down, but that ends up happening a lot more than we think.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes me the saddest when I hear a story about, like I'll read in the newspaper about some wonderful legacy business that closed down operations because they just couldn't find the right buyer. And I'm like, ah, I wish they'd known. I wish they'd known that they had this other option available to them because we could have kept them open.
Yeah.
And that's it's better for the owner, it's better for the employees, it's also better for the community. The communities that support these small businesses are the ones that have allowed them to be successful all these years. And sometimes if you pull a business out of a community, they might be serving a really crucial purpose. And
Hmm.
that could be really detrimental to, the actual community as well, to lose that small business. So
Yeah.
um, so what is employee ownership? Employee ownership is a structure where at least 30% of the business is held by the employees in a broad-based fashion. So we say 30%, that's because you will sometimes see people, corporation says we're an ESOP corporation, but when you really dig under the hood, it's like 10% is employee owned. And we don't see any real benefit to the employees if you're not hitting that like 30% ownership or more mark, because otherwise it's just not impactful. It's like, oh, great, I got an extra $500 at the end of the year. I don't really care. So we want to see it at least 30% stake. And the forms, which we'll go into more deeply as we continue here, are worker cooperatives, employee ownership trusts, and ESOPs. And I'll define those for you in a little bit. So what does it mean to be an owner? It means that you have some control over the business. So that's going to potentially be through voting for things like who's on the board of directors. You're going to have a voice in the decision making and potentially a role in the governance. It's not like all of a sudden everything's happening by consensus and there's no more hierarchical structures in your business. Don't think about it that way, but it's more that employees have some right to participate in saying what's going to happen with the business. And the employees benefit from that control. So they have paths to wealth building, paths to creating generational wealth, and they have influence in shaping additional worker benefits. So by having some say in the business, you're also having some agency in controlling kind of your pathway forward and your career. So how does this benefit the owners? I mentioned this before, but one of the number one points of confusion I see or myths I have to debunk is the idea that you have to take a haircut financially in order to sell to your employees. It's not the case. You are going to be able to achieve a fair market price. It's going to be based on debt capacity, future profitability modeling, free cash flow analysis, but it's going to be a fair market check, a fair market value. You are going to get to influence how you exit. So if you sell to a competitor, they may say, great, I've bought your business. I want you out tomorrow. This is no longer your business to run. It's now my concern. So off you go. And a lot of owners I talk to really would rather do a gradual exit. Some of them obviously are like, I need to be done yesterday, but a lot of them are like, I'm just doing too much. I'm working 70 hours a week, and I would love to retain a few components of what I'm doing. Maybe I want to stay on an advisory capacity, or I have one woman I'm speaking who's working through a feasibility study right now, and she's like, I love doing the marketing. She sees herself as the historian of her business. She knows everything about the business. She knows everything about how it interacts with the community. She really wants to retain that. But she doesn't want to run the operations anymore. She doesn't want to come in and do the accounting. She doesn't want to make the schedules. And so she's planning to pace herself out. I'm going to take myself out of these things. I'm going to train up some people to take over for me, but I'm going to stay on for another maybe 5 years, 10 years even. So you have that control, that ability to kind of make your own decisions about how and when you exit your business. And you get to preserve your legacy, this thing you've built, this wonderful business that is maybe a pillar of your community. Folks rely on it. They love it. It gets to stay around. It's not going to have to close up, and it's not going to change based on the whims of someone else who comes and takes it over from you.
Nice. Now, I said I wasn't going to interrupt, so you can answer this later. But on the last slide, you mentioned something about the market value, and that always or often tends to be a point of contention, whether it's through employee ownership or some other way of selling. It's like your fabulous house you lived in for 40 years that you think is so fabulous. And then, the real estate agent comes in and tells you it's worth this much. So later, if we have time, would love for you to just talk a little bit about how y'all figure that out and the process of getting to that value.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on it briefly now, but it's basically, we'll talk about it when we talk about the feasibility study, but it's a combination of debt capacity analysis, future profitability modeling based on kind of three different metrics. It's going to be best case scenario, normal case scenario, and stress case scenario. And then we're building in our feasibility study a couple of potential capital stacks, what the actual sale might look like. And those are based on how much of it is senior debt, how much is mezzanine debt, how much is seller financing, what's the time frame of that, the life cycle of that loan. And what we're trying to do is right size between how much is the business worth, how much does the owner need to get out of it, but also how much can the business bear in terms of servicing that debt and maintaining profitability. So it's really about right sizing the sale price. And you're right, sometimes it's not always an easy conversation. Sometimes the conversation is what you thought it was worth isn't quite what it is, but we'll be very transparent with how we get there.
Okay.
So just real quick, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. We can send these out and you can read these, but these are some of the statistics around the benefits to workers, to businesses, and to owners. And these statistics are sourced from a combination of the National Center for Employee Ownership, the Democracy at Work Institute, and the Employee Ownership Foundation. So those are all different players in the field that we work with closely. And so these have been taken from different studies. But at a high level, these numbers make sense. When the workers are worker owners, obviously they're going to take care of themselves. So you see those appropriate median incomes. That leads to higher household net worth. It leads to, higher profit margins. And, because people are the ones who are actually driving the business and seeing the profits, they're going to drive those profits higher. And then obviously with the pandemic, we saw that, businesses that are employee owned are more likely to keep their staff on. It makes sense. The staff are the owners. They're not going to fire themselves. So we see a lot of resiliency in employee owned businesses. Again, these are those same numbers, just higher wages for the employees, longer job tenure. People who are profit sharing and having a voice in leading the business tend to stay around longer, and that's leading to those higher household net worth.
Yeah.
All right, so I said I'd talk about what is employee ownership. So when we talk about employee ownership, we're talking about three main forms of employee ownership. We're talking about ESOPs, which I think are probably the most commonly known. More people know. When I say, has anyone heard of employee ownership in a room full of advisors or a room full of business owners? A lot of people will say, yes, I know what an ESOP is. And that's great. That's one piece of the equation. It's a qualified retirement plan. Then worker cooperatives. Maybe a few people have heard about this. This is a little, especially if you're on one of the coasts, maybe in California or New York, you've seen a lot of these. I grew up in California. My grocery store was a co-op, but maybe not as well known everywhere. And these are wholly owned by employee owners who share in profits and elect and serve on a board of directors. And then the new kid on the block, at least for us here in the United States, is the employee ownership trust. And the trust structure is actually one of the more common structures that we see in like the UK, for example. This has been highly taken advantage of by businesses in Britain for about 100 years. It's just starting to catch on here, but it is a trust ownership structure where the employees are beneficiaries of the trust. So I'll go a little bit more in depth here. So worker co-ops, like I said, the business is owned and governed by the workers. You have a board of directors that's formed, and generally we recommend that employees get to be part of that board. So you want to have some employee voice, but I often see an exiting owner, for example, decide to sit on that board for a period of time or maybe be the president of that board. It's a flexible form of business. It's most commonly a cooperative corporation, LLC. There are some federal tax benefits associated with a worker cooperative. Worker co-ops are relatively inexpensive to set up and to maintain over time. They're actually the lowest cost to set up and maintain over time. The employees do buy in, but it shouldn't be viewed as paying for the business. The employees are going to give a one-time pay-in to become an employee owner. And so it should be a number that feels significant. It's not like $50 or $100, but it's also not out of reach. So the owner should really be right sizing this so that it feels enough to kind of like, I'm putting some skin in the game, but it's not like I can't afford to become an employee owner. So maybe call it $1,000 or $5,000. It's a one-time buy-in. It's put into an account. It's kept there. It's not used for operating capital. It's not used you're not trying to grow it or you're just keeping it there. Think of it like a piggy bank, because if an employee decides they want to leave the co-op in the future, you need to give them their $1,000 back.
Okay.
And this is accessible to businesses of almost any size. Really, we need to see a minimum of 10, but much more accessible than some of the other forms.
Nice.
An employee ownership trust is a perpetual purpose trust. It's a form of a perpetual purpose trust, which is a trust that exists for perpetuity. That's the perpetual part. And it does mean that this is very hard to be resold. Once you sell into a trust, the intention is this company is just going to keep going on into the future. It's never going to be sold off. The purpose of the trust in an EOT is to benefit the employees. So you're going to see profit sharing in an EOT in the same way that you see profit sharing in a worker cooperative. But there also might be another purpose. So an example I like to give is Patagonia clothing company. A lot of people have heard of them. Patagonia is a PPT. They're not an EOT, but they're a PPT, and their purpose is environmental stewardship, taking care of the future of the planet. So you could also have an additional mission to your EOT. In addition to benefiting the employees, you could also be working towards some mission aligned goal. So for people who talk to me a lot about the legacy of their business, really being interested in protecting the mission of what they do, an EOT can be a really strong choice for them. The employees are going to receive a share of the profits. It's going to be through a profit sharing formula. And they have rights to representation on the governing bodies that are established for the trust. Sometimes trusts have a board, sometimes they don't, but they always have what's called a trust stewardship committee that's going to be guiding the business as it moves forward.
I keep thinking about attorneys with all this fancy language. Are there specialized attorneys who focus in just on this?
Absolutely, yes. There are absolutely specialized attorneys who focus on this. We've been doing this. We've been doing actual transition work for since 2017. We've been around since 2014. So we know most of the players in the game. So don't worry if you're hearing this and going, well, I don't have a co-op attorney. I don't have a trust attorney. That's our job. That's what we'll do. We are not the attorneys ourselves, but we know them and we will bring them in when it's appropriate so that these things can get set up as they need to be set up.
Right.
And then the ESOP, as I mentioned, it is a qualified retirement plan. It's similar to a 401k, but invested primarily in the stock of the company. It's a vehicle to purchase the stock of the existing shareholders with a friendly buyer. That's kind of true of all of these forms. And this is the most highly tax incentivized form of employee ownership, partially because it is the one that's been around here in the United States for the longest. And so it's had more steam behind it to get folks interested in making it advantaged. We could always change this for other folks if we talk to our representatives and figure out how to get tax advantages behind some of these other forms. And there are some advantages behind the other forms, but this one is the one that's the most tax advantaged. It's also the most expensive, both to set up and to maintain. And it is generally advisable for larger companies. We say you want to see at a minimum about 35 employees for an ESOP to make sense. So you want to see a bigger company. Generally, you want to see higher profit margins in these companies. All of them, in order to do a transition, need to be profitable, but ESOPs, those margins are higher. And it's just because there's a lot more complexity. And the reason that it costs more ongoing is because since it's a retirement vehicle, it's governed by ERISA, which is the government agency that oversees retirement accounts. And so you have to you have to do evaluation every year to keep the company in compliance and make sure that the government's happy. So, but it can be the right form for some larger, more mature companies. So it's definitely one we want to see on the table.
You gave us an idea of how many people, like 35 plus. Any ranges as far as revenue?
Yeah, in general, we don't see ESOP transition providers wanting to see revenue under 1 million, and
Okay.
really they'd be happier if it's like 2.5 to 5.
Okay.
So, this is just, I won't talk through all of these, but here's just a grid of some of the tax advantages that you'll see based on the different forms, what's available, what's not. So as I mentioned, obviously the ESOP has those highest advantages. Worker co-op has some. EOTs, less than the others. You do have those tax deductions on the profit sharing. Again, like I mentioned, we may see this changing. People are starting to learn about these. They're getting excited about these, and so who's to say? we vote with our feet. So let's get this get these out there. So how do we transition a business? So we start with what we call exploration. This is where I'm in the process. Do you want to know if you're a fit for employee ownership? Are you curious at all? What are you hoping to get out of it? I'll have 1, 2, maybe 3 free conversations with a small business owner who's interested in exploring this. There's no obligation to it. You can listen to my spiel and talk to me about your business and go, that sounds awful. I don't want to do that. That's okay. But that's where we start. The next step is what we call feasibility study. And you asked a little bit earlier about how do we get to that valuation. So this is where we do that. It's a 3 to 4 month deep dive into the financials of the business, but also the management of the business. Are there key person risks here? If the owner's leaving, do we need to train somebody up? Do we need to bring in a fractional CFO maybe? There's a lot of different considerations here. We're also trying to figure out which form of employee ownership is the right form for you. Are you well suited to be an ESOP? Are you well suited to be a co-op? Should you become an EOT? And that's going to be based on owner goals, as well as what we're seeing in the size of the company and the profitability.
Okay.
So 3 to 4 months, you get this report back. If you're happy with what you're seeing, you're like, the price that I'm seeing sounds about right. This range that you've given me of a couple different possible capital stacks that associate with certain prices. Then we can do some employee engagement. So we would do an info session, educate the employees on what employee ownership means and what it might mean for them if this company transitioned. And then we'll do an anonymous survey and just figure out, are the employees interested in doing this? Because we don't want to push forward and try to move into employee ownership if nobody's interested at all. It's usually not the case. Most people are pretty on board with this, but we need to have some buy-in there.
Well, like I was saying in the beginning, in our case, we've seen it where maybe people were sort of thinking about exiting and then they get an offer, or they're thinking about it and so they go and buy a valuation. So they've finished like that process. So they're sort of in the evaluation phase. So it seems like the feasibility could help either confirm or deny what
Yeah,
they're thinking. It just gives them another option.
absolutely. And we certainly have people who come to us and they're really not ready to exit yet, but they want
Okay.
to know what their options are. So you can do the feasibility study, you can get it back, and then you can say, this is great information. I'm going to put it on the shelf for a couple of years. Or maybe what you find out in there, going back to our conversation about the valuation not matching what the person is hoping to get out of it, they may take that back and go, okay, what I want to do is I want to spend 2 years really driving up my bottom line. I want to get my EBITDA, my average EBITDA higher because that's where that multiple is being based off of roughly. And so I'm going to spend a couple of years just doing that. And then I'm going to come back when I feel like I'm closer to the valuation that I want to get. So doing the feasibility study, no, at no stage are any of these depend, like, it's not like because you did the exploration, you have to do a feasibility. Because you did the feasibility, you have to do a transition. So a lot of companies do this sooner. And I say it's never too early to start at least exploring your options and finding out what's out there.
Yeah.
So, but if everything looks good and everybody's happy and we've got the sale price and the employees are engaged, then we can move into the transition. Project equity does not do ESOP transitions. If what we identify is that an ESOP is the right path for you, then we are going to advise you to work with another provider. And we know a lot of providers, and there's wonderful folks in the field doing that work. But if it's an EOT or a worker cooperative, we will actually do that transition work with you. Transitions take anywhere from maybe 6 to 8 months, maybe 12 on the outside. I say a really good ballpark is to say from feasibility to transition, think about a year. There could be outliers, obviously, if it's very complicated structure you're setting up. And it also, of course, depends on, availability of the right decision makers to get things done. But the transition is the whole thing. We're going to write your bylaws. We're going to build your sharing agreement. If we're building a board of directors, we're going to put it together now. We're going to do decision matrices and figure out what are the things that rise to the level that the board needs to make a decision. What are the things that require maybe a whole company vote? What are the things that just can exist in your already existing management hierarchies? So we're going to figure all that out. We're going to right size the governance to match the business. So it's an in-depth process. It involves the owner. It also involves some of the soon-to-be worker owners. We call that the transition team. It's a collaborative process with project equity walking alongside with you the whole time. During the transition, we are going to bring in those attorneys you mentioned that need to come in. We also can work with, if you have an in-house accountant or CPA or whatever team you want to have on board, they'll be there too. And we're really figuring the whole thing out, and we're getting the capital. We're doing underwriting the capital, figuring out exactly who all our funders are going to be, what that capital stack looks like, the terms of the loan, all of the things. So the transition is all of the things. Then we close the sale, I's dotted, T's crossed. And then we get to one of Project Equity's differentiators, which is we have a final stage of engagement, which we call Thrive. And Thrive is where we will stay with that new employee-owned company for another 1 to 2 years to help them grow into being employee-owned. So how to have that first vote of your board, how to, it's the time to do our first profit sharing. How do we make sure everyone understands and there's transparency? We don't advise on operationally for the business. We're advising on employee ownership, but this is something that differentiates us from other folks. We're kind of the only folks out there doing this work.
Nice. And so that's 2 additional years after the close.
1 to 2, depending on how much help is needed, how much is wanted.
Okay.
So I wanted to talk briefly about one of the companies that actually became employee owned. And this is a company that is very near and dear to my heart. They're actually close to me here in the Bay Area. This is At How Fine Art Services. What At How does is they were a third generation business. So the owner that sold the business, his grandfather started it. Originally, it was a trucking business, and the selling owner had actually sort of morphed it into a specialty art transportation and storage and restoration business. So if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I mean, they wouldn't have done it because it would be in the Bay Area, but the D Young here in the Bay Area, and you see an exhibit that's been hung, if you've ever wondered, who brought these in here? Like, how did it get here? These guys did. So they actually worked on, there's this massive Diego Rivera mural that was in one location in San Francisco and needed to be moved to another location. And when I say massive, I'm talking like 3 stories high, like almost as long as a city block. And they're the ones who transported it. They had to do all this like seismic studies and like how much pressure could it take in special trucks, but they do all that work. And art, as most people, I think many of us know, there's a lot of money in art, right? And so this was a very attractive business to private equity. They had a lot of offers coming in, people who wanted to buy them out. And the selling owner was really, he cared a lot about his employees. He had done things like he instituted a 4-day work week because he wanted to allow, a lot of the people who worked for him were artists. And it's hard to live as an artist. It's hard to make money as an artist. And so he wanted them to have a job that paid them well and for free time to do their art. So there were a lot of things about the culture of his company that he wanted to preserve. And so he said no to all that private equity money that came beating down his door. And instead, they transitioned into a worker co-op. So they became a co-op in 2012. They had 40 employees. And they see it now as a real differentiator. People talk to them about how cool it is that they do this. They want to work with them because they support it. Like museums like to support, like to look good when they talk about the work they do. A lot of museums have charitable funds. And so being able to say that they're hiring an employee-owned company is a benefit.
Yeah.
Being employee-owned can be a selling point for your business. It can differentiate you from competition. And in House case, that's one of the things that they do. And I talked to some of the employees. I had the distinct pleasure of being able to be the person to interview these folks post-transition, to talk to them about what it was like. And I had one woman say, look, you know, she said, I grew up in the Bay Area. I have a lot of friends who had to leave the Bay. They couldn't afford to live here anymore. And because of the transition, because of AdHub becoming employee owned and me reaping the benefits of being an employee owner, I get to live here. I don't have to leave my home. Um,
Yeah.
I had another employee tell me, I had a lot of jobs where people would say, think like an owner, I want you to really take ownership. And he's like, but nobody treated me like an owner and I wasn't an owner. And so he actually started with the company as they were mid-transition. And that was one of the components for him of actually deciding that he wanted to work here, was because it was like, oh, I don't have to think like an owner, I will be an owner. And so it's a real eye-opening moment. So AtHow is a great example of that. If you want to read their full story, we do have it on our website. You can go. We actually have a ton of owner stories on our website. If you go to
Okay.
Project Equity and then go to Learn, you can sort it by location. You can sort it by industry, what industry these folks are in. You can sort it by the type of employee ownership they are. And it's really interesting if you just want to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people who choose to take this path. It's a really powerful tool for that.
Yes. I mean, that story is so powerful. And it just reminds me there's lots of ways to own a company, but it sounds like the people who are drawn to this employee ownership just have a certain mindset about the people.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's a different mindset, around the level of impact that you want to have. Um, because that story is really powerful. And yeah, I think I had the opposite problem when I worked for people. I I just always accidentally worked like I owned it. Which is a problem sometimes. Like my daughter says, doing too much. My 10-year-old mom, DTM. But I think a lot of people really need some motivation to be able to go all in at that level. And this is a great way to motivate people because it's mutually beneficial. Like everybody's reaping benefits.
Yeah, no, I mean another just quick example. I didn't do this interview, but one of my colleagues did. He was talking to somebody. It was a company that had worked in warehousing. So they had a bunch of people who like operated forklifts and like were moving things around in these big warehouses. And they asked, well, what's different for you now before? And the guy pointed to the forklift and he said, well, I pay a lot more attention to whether we're properly servicing and maintaining that forklift because that's my forklift, you know? So people start to make better decisions that overall lead to a better bottom line because they are actual beneficiaries of it. So, there's a lot of mentality shift that changes around. I'm not just showing up and punching a clock. I'm showing up and I'm building a business. And so to those statistics I pointed to earlier, that's where a lot of that comes from. Those higher bottom lines, those better profit margins. It's because when people are thinking about that, another example was a coffee company, and they once they became employee owned, they started doing open book management, and they're opening up the books, sitting down with the whole company, and going, here's how much we pay for this, and here's what this costs, and here's how we do this. And one of the baristas pointed to a line item and said, "Is that how much we pay for cups?" And the owner said, "Yeah, that's how much we pay for cups." And she said, "Man, I am never double cupping an order if the customer doesn't ask for it again."
Yeah.
It's little stuff, but it all adds up.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I really appreciate that. I also think it's a good moment, though. It's not all sunshine and roses, I'm sure. There's
No,
got to be, what do you think is one of the main challenges? I mean, you can touch on this later. I don't know how many more slides we have, but
we're pretty close.
something to think about is like, okay, what are some of the, or maybe one or two of the big challenges to making these transitions?
This is hard work. This is, you are, I'd say people are really excited when we start and they're really excited when we're done. And the in between, it's emotional work. It's a lot of tough decisions. Our client services team, who are the group that actually do this work with our clients, we dedicate two client services folks to each feasibility and each transition. So you always have a redundancy in there, but they say, look, part of what we do is we're technical assistance providers. Part of what we do is we're therapists,
Mhm.
because talking through things like, what is decision making going to look like? What is governance going to look like? Those are deep conversations. And sometimes they uncover painful things. Sometimes they uncover maybe there was some tension here before, but people were just kind of keeping it under the rug. And now that we're actually talking about doing this all together, well, you know what? I need to tell you what I think about this or that. So yeah, it's not easy work. It's
Mhm.
worthwhile work. And the
Yeah.
end result is worth it. Um, but yeah, no, it's not to sugarcoat it. And I think if you're realistic, you know, any way of divesting yourself from your business is going to be emotional. I had one of my first clients that I offered a feasibility study to. When I sat down with her to offer her the study, she started crying. And
Mhm.
and I said, hey, she's like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, no, no, no. Apart from choosing who are you going to spend your life with, where are you going to spend your life, and what are you going to spend your life doing, what you're going to do with the small business you built is one of the biggest decisions you're going to make. So
Yeah.
be be gentle with yourself, and really understand that you're making a big decision, you're investing the work, but you're
Mhm.
doing it because at the end of the day, you're going to get to preserve something you worked so hard to create. And that's not only good for you, it's also good for your community. Because let's say an example of private equity, you sell out to private equity. Often it's not someone who's located in your community. It's someone in New York or someone in San Francisco, some banker somewhere, right? So when the profits come into that business and you have that private equity investor, they go out the top and they go out of your community and they go away. If
Mhm.
you If you become employee owned, those profits go back to your employees who live in your community, and you just create this flywheel where now they're spending their money at the other small business down the street. And it's raising the tide for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
So, um, I did mention this briefly. We do have capital available. We are a capital provider. So we also work with CDFIs and other folks to bring capital to these transactions, but we have some specialized programs. So for certain folks, we would uncover during your feasibility study if you were viable to receive our capital. But that is something that we also provide in addition to the partnerships with other funders. And more information about this can also be found on our website. And that's it. This is me. If you are interested, if this was exciting to you, if you had, oh gosh, I have a million more questions, Megan, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to have a conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was super helpful. I know the people in our community, I'm just going to send it to them. Like after listening to you, usually I'm asking people, hey, would this be helpful? I'm just going to pop this into a lot of folks who I know it's in there along with their list of 100 things to get done. Because sometimes it's just planting the seed for options, and it's great for business owners to have this as an option. So thank you so much, Megan. So folks can email you,
Yep.
text you, give you a call if they want to know more.
Absolutely. You can also, if you're not quite ready to commit to a conversation yet, go on the website, look at some of those owner stories. There's an ebook you can download off the website that'll go in depth on the different forms of employee ownership. But like I said, there's no obligation to having a conversation with me. There's no cost to having a conversation with me. And a lot of times I have that preliminary conversation. I don't hear from them for another 6, 8 months, maybe a year. So, if you're curious, if this sparked anything, you're just like, how does that work? Let's have a talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paris. It was wonderful to be in conversation with you, and I'm really excited to thank you for sharing this with your folks.
Absolutely.